Coming up next, from the campus of the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library in downtown Stanton, Virginia, comes the Virginia 20th District Candidate Forum. The Woodrow Wilson Candidate Forum has been brought to you by the Peace and Financial Group because we know the best choices are made when you have reliable, accurate information. At Peace and Financial, we work hard to ensure our clients make well-informed, smart financial decisions.
Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library Candidate Forum. This forum focuses on the candidates from the 20th District for the Virginia House of Delegates. They are incumbent Richard Dickie Bell, Republican Party, Michelle Edwards, Democratic Party, and Will Hammer, Libertarian Party. The candidates were each given a set of 10 questions 24 hours prior to their interview. This lead time ensured that the candidates were given an opportunity to consider each question carefully and to prepare full and concise answers. Each candidate was filmed separately, but was asked the same questions as the other candidates in the same order. Each candidate was given up to 90 seconds to respond. Candidates were not given an opportunity to redo their answers, and lots were drawn randomly to determine the order in which the candidates will appear, with a rotation in the order for each set of questions. As a 501c3 nonprofit organization, the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library ensures that the candidate forum will follow a nonpartisan and unbiased and impartial format. We will begin with Will Hammer. We often hear about the need for reform in our public school system. A recent poll shows that among voters in Virginia, improving K-12 education is their top concern. What does the term educational reform mean to you, and what do you believe the General Assembly can do to improve our public schools?
So educational reform, I believe, is very important. Education of our children allows them to progress and become educated and be able to have good, fulfilling careers. And if we are able to get the government out of a lot of education, I think that we could see real reform. I think that our centralized, standardized testing that really has been ramped up in the last 15 years or so, I think that kind of takes away from our education. I think that we have taken a lot of power from the teachers and centralized it into more standardized testing. And I would like to see, personally, less standardized testing and more power back to the local level and more power back to the teacher to allow them to be creative, to do what they went to do and to teach children, to provide them a good education. And so I see reform as trying to get bureaucracy out of it. Spending more money in it doesn't necessarily fix the problem. I think that we could cut the money, but also at the same time provide a better education system for our youth in Virginia.
Robin, I think that educational reform is an ongoing process to help public schools meet the needs of a changing world and a changing population. And so I think this starts from the very beginning. This starts with preschool kids and increasing access to that service in our society, because a lot of kids, particularly from disadvantaged families, enter kindergarten with pre-academic skills below age peers. So I would like to first and foremost start to increase access to that. And then in elementary school, I believe that we absolutely have to lower the teacher and student ratio. And I'd also want to see increased technology by investing in infrastructure in our schools. And in order to increase school choice within our public school systems, in our high school, I would like to see our high schools establish career academies and increasing those career opportunities in addition to the Governor's School and the career and technical education centers. And I would like to see schools have focus in environmental science, political science, economics, manufacturing and construction, and I'd like to see reciprocity, where a student from Stanton could go to Waynesboro to study, to participate in those programs, perhaps if that student wants to do arts and letters, or a student from Stewart's Draft might be able to go to Gap to focus on science and technology. And I like to see those types of choices, and I believe that we need to address the teacher shortage that's looming over our state, and we need to increase pathways for teacher certification.
Well, I think that reform means a lot of things to a lot of different people. For me, it means a level playing field for all our students so that every student across the spectrum has the same opportunity. We can't guarantee outcomes for them, but the students in rural Wise County, Lee County should have the same opportunities as those in Fairfax and places where there are more resources. I think in order to make that happen, there have to be a couple of things. First of all, we still operate from an agricultural calendar and an industrial model, and we're in the digital age, and that's not working so well. We need a new funding formula. The composite index is not good for rural Virginia. It's patently unfair for schools in the rural part of the state. So I think we need to address both of those things in the General Assembly, along with school choice. If we can add more choices for parents and families for their children, then I think that playing field gets a lot more level.
In 2021, the Virginia General Assembly must create new congressional and state legislative districting maps. During the last legislative session, 3 anti-gerrymandering measures aimed at creating a fairer, more competitive electoral process passed the Senate with bipartisan support. However, it died in a House of Delegates subcommittee. What are your thoughts on redistricting reform?
First off, Robin, I think it's a shame that the House of Delegates has not been able to take seriously this threat to democracy, and I believe that's what gerrymandering is. I believe it's a threat to our democracy. Currently, as it stands, the party in power in the House of Delegates has the power to draw the districts, and they use very precise population data, and they're able to draw their districts to enhance their capacity to re-win elections, cycle after cycle. And so, in essence, politicians are choosing their voters, and voters are not choosing their politicians. And I believe, rather than having the folks who are benefiting from this system creating these districts, we need to create nonpartisan commissions that use nonpartisan criteria to establish districts. And I believe this process needs to be immediate, and I believe it needs to be transparent. By transparent, I mean the process has to be open to the public, and I believe that the public needs to have input into this. And I believe that this is not something that is just a Republican issue. It's wrong no matter what party is in charge. It's entirely possible that the Democrats will take the House of Delegates and the Senate in November, in which case I will still fight for fair redistricting, whether my party is in power or not.
Well, first of all, I'm a proponent of reforming redistricting. I don't like the process that we use. There are currently there's litigation before the Supreme Court, which has heard a redistricting case, and there's some in federal court. And depending on their rulings, it may change the way redistricting looks to all of us. Having said that, I think a better model would create more competitive districts, and I think that would be a good thing. I think we'd get better candidates. I think that we would have a much higher voter interest if these districts were more competitive. I will say this, I don't think that an independent panel is necessarily the right way to go, because I don't think you can find nonpartisan people anymore. And I do think it's a function of the legislature to do this. It should be more bipartisan than the process is currently. But I do think because legislators are answerable to the people, I think they're the ones who should make these decisions. But there's plenty of room for improvement in our redistricting process, and I'd like to see us do something about it.
Well, gerrymandering is definitely a huge issue in the United States, but definitely Virginia. You look at the map of the different districts, and you just wonder where they came from. It's very clear that partisan politics plays a big role in it, and it doesn't matter which party is in power and the majority. They will use that to benefit themselves. And so I think that gerrymandering is a huge issue that we need to look at. We need to put that into an independent commission, or we could even try to use some algorithms. There's many other ways other than partisan or even bipartisan, I don't believe, would solve the issue. So I think the independent commission or algorithm, and we need to allow constituents to elect their officials, not the officials to elect their constituents.
The proposed Atlantic Coast Pipeline incorporates many frontline issues for citizens of the 20th District. This proposed pipeline has brought heated debate on the issues of energy, the environment, the economy, and the use of eminent domain by a private utility. What are your thoughts on the proposed pipeline?
Well, the pipeline is an emotional issue, no question about it, and this district is the most heavily impacted in the state. The path cuts right through the district from one end to the other, but it's not a legislative issue. Nobody seeking this office, nobody holding this office, and nobody in the General Assembly is going to have a vote on the pipeline. Making promises that you can stop it or that you can reroute it, it's just not accurate, and it's a little disingenuous. What I have done, because I've been in contact with a lot of people, pro and con, I have written 3 letters to the Federal Energy Regulation Commission asking them for reconsideration. I've written 2 letters each to the State Water Control Board and the Department of Environmental Quality, because I'm concerned about the water supply and that it may be endangered with the route that the path that this route takes. The pipeline itself, that decision will be made by someone else other than the state legislature. And as emotional as it is, and as close to people as it is, there's really not much else we can do about it. Now, I will tell you this, eminent domain, I'm not a fan, particularly in the hands of the private sector or public utilities. And I think it's, so far that hasn't been used. In spite of what you hear, settlements have been negotiated rather than taken through eminent domain.
Well, as a libertarian, property rights are the cornerstone of our political philosophy. You should be able to own your own property and be able to keep it as long as you want to keep it. So I'm not necessarily against fossil fuel energy pipelines, but I am against the use of eminent domain, especially when it's used for private corporations. So I've been against that back in 2014 when I ran as well. I was against that. So there's many ways that they can go around. They don't have to have another right-of-way, and they don't have to do all the surveys on people's property. There's other right-of-ways that they already have in place that they can use to do the pipeline, which would allow for them to not use eminent domain. If we had more powerful property rights, a lot of these things would not be able to get off the ground because they would have to pay fair market value and they have to get the landowners to actually sell it without using the force of the state to do so. In terms of energy, I believe that if we had more of a free market, we would see more green technologies already being used. I think that the various regulations and of course the special interests within the energy companies such as Dominion and other various companies has kept us behind. And so I think that if we open up the market, then we'll see a much more diverse and even green technology.
Robin, when I first became a candidate for this office, the biggest concern that I have heard from residents of this district is the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. It is something that has definitely heated people up and is bringing them out, and people are expressing their voices. As somebody who wants to represent the needs and concerns of the 20th District, I have come out strongly against the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. I find it troubling that a for-profit corporation has the same power as the federal government and state government of eminent domain, because generally this is used for public use, not for profit. And so I find that troubling, particularly since the corporation in question is one that donates tens of thousands of dollars to politicians of both parties in the House of Delegates and Senate. And this concerns me, the big money in politics. I believe that this is not something that's helpful to our district. I don't believe that this is going to increase our consumption at all. It's going to increase the cost to access natural gas in our area. It's a transmission pipeline. We certainly will not have access to it. It will be used for coastal Virginia, North Carolina, and eventually overseas. Now, we will not even be able to have permanent jobs. It'll be all temporary jobs that will be mostly from skilled journeymen from outside our district and from around the state. So while we are not going to be benefiting economically, that we will be the ones left footing the bill.
If you were asked to create a task force to address the rising cost of health care in Virginia, Who would you ask to join your team, and what recommendations would you personally bring to the table?
I don't have anybody specifically in mind for task force, but as with anything, I believe that freeing the market up allows for better competition, allows for less cronyism and less monopolistic ways that the companies do, and allows them to raise the prices. If we allow for people to buy across state lines, if we do some tort reform, and if we just get the government out of subsidizing various sectors of the medical industry, then I think we will see a lot of costs go down. The government wasn't into the medical field until the last 50 years or so, and if you look at costs, in the last 50 years they have skyrocketed. Before, you would have more of a free market, and you would allow for mutual aid societies and charities and other things that would help people that cannot afford it, even when the prices were relatively low compared to today's massively inflated prices. So I believe if you, like I said, open up the free market to the medical industry, and you wouldn't have these prices going up. I mean, myself, I haven't had insurance the last few years, and it's just because it's skyrocketed so much, and we have it so attached to our work now that if you don't have a job, if you're a self-employed person, then it's a huge cost.
Robin, I think it's important to bring the big players that are healthcare providers, Inova, Centara, Carillion, UVA, but also Augusta Health Center, and bring those people together with the health insurance providers, with patient advocacy groups, with nurses and doctor associations, but also with the public agencies that administer Medicaid and Medicare, and bringing those people together to do a study on what a good healthcare profile looks like for each citizen in Virginia, and make those targets for what that looks like. What I would hopefully recommend and bring to the House of Delegates are suggestions for incentivizing healthy life choices, cessation of smoking, having a supervised weight loss and exercise program with a doctor, and also making healthy food choices. But I'd also like to begin an incremental move toward Medicare for all, because I believe that taking the burden of healthcare from businesses will allow companies to invest more in their own businesses, invest in job creation, and also invest in their own employees. And I believe having a single-payer system will take off the administrative burden from hospitals and clinics who have to deal with a multitude of insurance providers.
I think one of the problems is that we never have all the stakeholders at the table at the same time. We need hospital administrators, we need drug companies, we need healthcare providers, we need the regulators, we need insurance companies. We need all those people sitting down together trying to find solutions to this. And I'm just not convinced that that's happening. I think everybody's operating in their own little orbit when it comes to healthcare, and the results are not good so far. There are a couple of things that I'd do if it were up to me. First thing I'd do is make the industry more competitive. I'd start by repealing the Certificate of Public Need requirements. I think it's an outdated method that discourages competition, and I think in healthcare we need competition. I think if we had it, we'd see the quality go up and the costs go down. There are some things we can't do at the state level. I'd like to see us compete across state lines with insurance companies, but that's not our call at the state level. Some other things that we can do are health savings accounts. Everybody should be allowed to have one of those. Not required to, but allowed to. And we can do that. That's something we can accomplish. I think direct primary care, where patients actually contribute to a physician and then have their funds on deposit when they need the services. And maybe they never need them. It's sort of their own insurance policy, and I think that's a good idea too.
More and more Americans are growing frustrated with government. We see the ideological distance between political parties grow wider. We see unwillingness to compromise, and we see politicians become, quite frankly, uncivil toward those who disagree with their beliefs. What do you see as the solution to restore our fellow citizens' trust in government?
Robin, that's a great question. It's very timely. I think that we need to see our elected officials acting in mature and responsible and respectful ways towards one another, and putting their own self-interest and the interest of special interests aside and work toward the common good. There is a lot that needs to be done in our country, and we want to see responsible leadership, and we want them to lead by example. And I also believe that right now there are a lot of people, particularly at the congressional level, who are afraid to come and meet with their own constituents. And that's because there are a lot of constituents who are angry, and they don't want to face that anger and frustration from their constituents. However, I believe that if an elected official is proactive and is listening to and responding to the concerns and needs of their constituents, you can avoid that type of negative relationship between your own voters. And so I would be the type of person who would always be in contact with my constituents and who would listen and respond. And I think being proactive rather than evasive and reactive goes a long way.
That question sounds like it's more pertinent for Washington politics than Richmond politics, and we all know that Washington government is a little bit dysfunctional these days. In Richmond, most folks would be surprised at how much cooperation there is among both parties and among all the people in the General Assembly. We get along pretty well. It doesn't mean that we're going to convince each other to swing over or switch sides on anything. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. The budget's a good example. Every budget is a compromise, and we're required by law to pass a balanced budget. We can't do that with one party making all the decisions about it. So I think in Richmond there's a lot more cooperation than most folks realize. As far as what we do about it, it's unfortunate. And I think in this last session, when we saw the governor veto so many bills and his party line up behind him to sustain those vetoes, it was a little bit disappointing, because that further creates this partisan divide. Some of those folks had voted for the bills that he vetoed, but then hung with him to sustain the veto. So things like that are critical when you talk about the partisan divide, and I don't know how you fix that exactly. So hopefully there is a solution.
Well, I think that a general untrust of the government might be a good thing. I don't necessarily think that trust in the government is the best route, but I do believe in civil discourse, civil conversation in regards to politics. And I think that our two-party system has really caused this, is that it's left versus right, red versus blue. And so we get this tribalism with these two parties that we have created, and they have a monopoly over the political system with gerrymandering, with other barriers to entry for third-party candidates such as myself. We have to spend a lot more time, a lot more effort just to run for office. And then we have a lot of people that are already in the mindset that the two parties are the only parties that they can vote for. And so it's just created I believe, a toxic environment. And quite frankly, I don't really enjoy politics because of how polarized it's become. And so I think that if we, us as Americans, look at the two parties and realize that they have not really done much difference, all they do is really just bash heads in public, but then they do come together when it's things that really do not benefit us.
Many different state and national organizations and associations provide an annual scorecard on how delegates vote in support of their agenda. Which organization would you be most proud to receive a 100% score, and why?
Well, I have to tell you that I very seldom have I ever gotten a 100% score, because I don't vote according to anybody's report card. And there are a lot of those things that float around. And sometimes I can agree with the issues on them, and sometimes I can't. I take my votes seriously, and I always cast those votes on what I think is the right thing to do. Sometimes that fits someone's score sheet, and sometimes it doesn't. Most often it doesn't. But there's a reason that they have those. I think some of those organizations have gotten out of their lane, if you will, and their scope has gotten so broad that they grade you on issues that don't even fit in their organization. So the whole thing's a little bit skewed. I would never take a vote based on someone's report card. But if I had to be proud of a record with one, I think it would probably be with the Chamber of Commerce, the State Chamber of Commerce, or the National Federation of Independent Businesses, because they are focused on what's good for Virginia across the board, job growth, business growth, education, taking care of all the things that are important to Virginians regardless of their political persuasion. So I could live with an endorsement or a high grade from either one of those, I think.
I don't know if I have an organization that I have in mind that I would want to receive 100%. I mean, there's several that I follow and that I agree with. Maybe Freedom Works, maybe Normal, and other organizations. I definitely agree with in certain aspects. So I just looked at trying to increase the individual's power, self-governance, and to try to eliminate and push back the overreach of government as much as possible. So I don't really, like I said, have one organization because they kind of have different agendas that not necessarily that I agree with 100% of the time.
Robin, there's an organization called Common Cause, and I like Common Cause because it is nonpartisan, it's not-for-profit, and it's a grassroots national organization with over 700,000 people that work across the country to foster the real American values of democracy. And so what they do is try to protect and support voting rights so that all people's voices count in government in our country. They also try to limit the power of big money in government, which I think is extremely important, and I hope to work towards that as well. They also try to push ethics legislation so that that elected officials are not able to succumb to bribery, that they're not engaging in any type of favoritism or nepotism. And I think this is very important to maintain a true democracy. They're also advocating for net neutrality, which is an open and open access to the internet. And I think that's an extremely important part of our democracy because the internet is truly how we're communicating and how we're getting our information.
How much guidance do you take from your party's platform and priorities, and would you be comfortable in taking a stance that may be different from your party's platform?
Well, luckily, being a Libertarian, I agree with my political platform for my party. I don't feel like I have to compromise any of my principles because I am a Libertarian. Being third party allows me to be principled and not feel like I'm selling out and have to toe the party line. So I don't really think of any issues that I would necessarily go against the Libertarian Party because I deeply believe in the Libertarian philosophy of self-governance, of self-ownership, of property rights. So I believe that, making people, more power to the people is beneficial to my constituents in every aspect. So I have no issues with that.
I appreciate this question, Robin. It gave me the opportunity to go online and reread my party's national platform, but I also went online and reread the Republican national platform. And surprisingly, they're surprisingly similar. And I do understand that party politics and party leadership have influence over how a delegate votes, but I truly believe that I am in accordance and alignment with my party's platform. But I also understand that Republican delegates in the House have the same goals and issues that I do. We all want to see the American dream become a reality. We all care about economic flourishing. We care about home ownership. We care about clean environment. We care about our kids' safety in school. And so if there's a Republican in the House that is putting forth a proposal or a bill that is in the best interest of our constituents, I will absolutely support that delegate. And on the contrary, if there's a Democrat or a Democratic proposal that I don't think is working in the best interest of our constituents and that is not in the best interest of working towards the American dream, I would absolutely oppose it.
Well, I'm not sure you ever get comfortable doing that, but sometimes you have to, and I've done it. It doesn't make you comfortable when your party folks don't agree with your position or the stand that you take, but I've done it and I'm not afraid to do it. The platform's important. It gives you an idea or a blueprint for where you want to go legislatively and politically. And so I think in a lot of ways it's a good thing. I can support it up until the point that it conflicts with my own principles. And if there's something in a party platform that doesn't fit what I believe in principle, then I can't support it. I have done that several times. In fact, I've gotten sideways with my folks on a number of occasions because I'm trying to do the right thing. And we may agree what the right thing is. We don't always agree on the same way to get there. I prefer a more direct path. I just don't like to play the game sometimes. I want to get results. So I've been there and I've done that, and I know you pay a price for it. And I understand that, but it doesn't discourage me. I think the platform is just that. I think it's a platform. It's not really a launching pad, and you don't have to follow it word for word, line for line in order to be effective.
Last year, over 1,400 Virginians died of opiate overdose. And opioid abuse is now considered a public health emergency in Virginia. The reality is that each of us knows someone who's been affected by opioid abuse. What are your recommendations in dealing with this issue?
Robin, it's true, and I myself know several people that are affected by opioid abuse, and it not only affects that person, but it affects their families, and it affects their friends, and it affects society. It's truly a national and a state health crisis. Most people do become addicted to opioids because of an injury, and they begin to take opioids simply to manage pain. And I think in order to combat that, I think doctors and healthcare providers need to take the lead and to understand the extent of addiction in our state and in our country. And one recommendation has been to simply lower the dosage and reduce the number of pills that are prescribed in the beginning to minimize the impact of the drug and to minimize the potential for becoming addicted. I think it's also important for healthcare providers to prescribe alternative therapies like massage, chiropractic, physical therapy, and other things that can help to minimize pain so that we aren't just looking towards taking pills. I also think that it's important to continue the education process that's already started, that's helping society to see people who have addiction as not criminals, not addicts, but as people who are truly sick and need help.
It's a real crisis for us, and we dealt with it pretty heavily in the last session of the General Assembly. Doctors O'Bannon and Pillion both had legislation to help in this regard. Right now, the statistics are staggering. Nationally, there are like 91 people a day who die from overdoses, and about half of those are from legal prescription overdoses. So I think one of the things we need, first of all, is very strict enforcement of prescription monitoring. We need to pay more attention and closer attention to what's happening with prescription drugs. There are a lot of abuses. There's a lot of prescription shopping going on, and we put some things in place to try to tame that and calm it down. The other thing is I think our physicians and the patients as well need to be looking at alternative pain treatments. There may be some things you can do. Every sore back or every sore shoulder may not require that you get a narcotic dose to ease the pain. You may be able to do the same thing with physical therapy or with some kind of other treatment. I don't think we're looking closely enough at doing that. That'll help on the legal side, of the legal drug side. On the illegal side, where most of the overdoses are occurring these days, we've got a really tough job ahead of us, I think.
I believe that actually legalizing marijuana, at least in the medical realm, but I believe in recreational as well. A lot of doctors overprescribe opioids. A lot of people get hooked onto opioids and maybe go towards heroin and other things. If we stop the war on drugs, which is also on the federal level, but if we do our part on the state level, legalize it, I think that we could see that greatly reduce. I think if you look at states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, it's been a great success. They have lower use of those drugs. They have lower DUIs. They have a lot of great benefits that come from that. And not that I'm necessarily for the taxation of marijuana, but I know if it does pass, then there would be taxation that will come along with that. And so we could see that as revenue towards state government, that we'd be able to reduce revenue in other places, such as other taxation like income tax. That could be replaced with a marijuana tax, which, like I said, I'm not for taxation, but I see that more, see that better than a regular income tax.
What is or would your decision-making process be if a majority of your constituents have a position that conflicts with your conscience?
Well, the hardest thing about that question is determining if it's a true majority, because in government, like so many other things, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, as they say. And so you hear from a lot of folks who may not be the majority at all, but they're the ones with the loudest voice. So the first thing you have to do is determine, is this a majority issue for the folks in my district? And once you make that determination, if they are strongly in favor of or against something that you may have a different position on, then I think as a representative of those people, you have to be willing to reconsider at least and maybe switch your position, at least for a vote, if it's an important vote. I've done that. It's not easy to do when you're convicted on an issue. But I have done it because I have determined on a couple of cases that the overwhelming majority of my constituents want me to do something else. When you can make that determination honestly and assuredly, then I think you have to do it. It does put you in conflict sometimes with your own conscience. But I'll do that, and I'm willing to do that right up into the point where my principles come into play, and I can't forsake some of my own principles for that.
This is a great question, because I'm sure it happens often for people who are in state government. But when we're dealing with conscience, I think for me at least, I would be turning to prayer, of course, and I would also turn to discussions with my husband and other people that I trust to share my deepest thoughts. But I also think when it comes to a very important issue that you need to talk with as many people as possible in your district who will be affected by the decisions that you're making. But I also know that people elect you because they trust your judgment and they trust you and your values. And I believe that people respect those who make decisions according to their conscience. So I think ultimately it's expected that a delegate would make decisions according to their conscience. And the beautiful thing about democracy is that if a delegate's decisions and voting record do not align with people's values, they can simply be voted out of office in 2 years. So, but I do think that I would absolutely vote my conscience in all decision making.
Well, as I explained earlier, my conscience is for giving power to the individual, self-governance, self-ownership. So I believe in giving that power back to the people. I believe in reducing as much coercion, as much as involuntary interaction and exchanges as possible. And so I believe that getting the government out of your life as much as possible does reduce that and allows for people to self-govern themselves and to give more power to them and to allow them to keep more of their money, and to, as long as they don't harm anybody else, then we're good.
Assuming you are elected this November, what will be your first priority in the House of Delegates in January?
Robin, as with any new job, I think it's important to go in with humility, and I would go in ready and eager to listen, to ask questions, and to learn. And I would also be very, very excited to build relationships with people in our district, with the delegates throughout the Valley, throughout the District 20 and the 25th District, because our districts are the ones that have a lot in common economically and socially. So I believe they would be important to build strong relationships across party with those folks who are representing people with the same needs. And so I would enter not necessarily to start charging forth with legislation, but truly to learn and have an open and humble heart in becoming a delegate.
I want to hold online town halls. I want to bring my constituents into the legislative process. I want to bring more sunlight to the process in Richmond. when I'm in Richmond, I like to have Google Hangouts or Skype sessions or whatever it is with my constituents, have some in-person town halls as well when I'm back in the area. I just want to open up the process and just walk the walk that I've been talking about, not accepting any donations from corporations and special interests, and to be that dissenting voice in Richmond, and to, like I said, walk the walk of libertarianism.
Well, when the session convenes, there are going to be two things that sort of overshadow everybody's priorities, and one of those will be a new administration, and we don't know who that's going to be. Things could have a different look, they could have a similar look. The other thing is the budget. In this session that's coming up, the governor who's leaving gets to present his only budget, the only one that he gets to write. And then the General Assembly usually spends the session rewriting that because it doesn't work for the incoming folks. Those two things are huge, and they will make a big difference. For me personally, I have some legislation that's been left on the table, either through vetoes by the governor, either through a slight lack of the bipartisan support I needed to get them passed, and they all relate to our young people and our students or our people with special needs. Those are very important to me. They're always a priority for me. Beyond the budget and the new administration, those will be my priorities when I go back to Richmond. I think it's good legislation. We've come close on a number of occasions, and a couple of them have actually passed more than once, but been vetoed more than once. So those are priorities for me. That's where I'm focused, and that's what I'll do if I'm returned to Richmond.
Hi, my name is Will Hammer, and I'm the Libertarian candidate for Virginia's House of Delegates 20th District. Being a Libertarian, I stand for the individual. I believe in self-ownership and self-government, so I want to eliminate as much involuntary exchanges and interactions and promote more voluntary interactions. This includes cutting tax as much as possible and even possibly abolishing the income tax. This means stopping the war on drugs to legalize marijuana if possible. This means not being owned by corporations and special interests. This means I am owned by the constituents of the 20th District, that I am promoting the rights for the individuals and trying to empower them more so than the two parties, which have failed us in that aspect. If you look at any voting record of the Democrats and Republicans, you can just look at their donors from various special interests and corporations, and their votes follow those donations. So this November, please consider voting outside the two parties that bring real change to Virginia. Voting the other second party, the major party, doesn't necessarily bring any real change. We need to get past that tribalism of left versus right, red versus blue, and we need to try to bring more power back to the individual. Thank you.
For the past 8 years, I've been your delegate to the General Assembly. It's been my honor to serve there. It's a huge honor to serve in the country's oldest representative legislative body, and I don't take that duty lightly. To sit and walk the halls where Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Mason, where those folks have gone before us and served, is very moving, and it's very, very important to me to uphold the traditions of those statesmen. I've tried to do that. I've worked very hard at the job. I've tried to represent all 80,000 people in this district because I believe all 80,000 have a voice. It may not be the voice that I agree with every time. It may not be a voice that some days I want to hear, but I listen, and I've always listened, and I believe you're entitled to be heard. If I'm reelected, I'll continue to do that. My door's always open. I'm always willing to listen, and I can have my mind changed if you're persuasive enough. It's important to me to be a good public servant. I think this job's all about public service. I'm not as good at the politics, but I'm pretty good at the public service. And I would ask for your, respectfully, I would ask for your vote again this November to return me to Richmond. Thank you.
As a lifelong Virginian, I care about this Commonwealth. I care about our families, our environment, our institutions, our economy, and our culture. I want to be your voice in the House of Delegates. I want to represent you, the 20th District. I want to represent your values. I want to represent your needs and concerns. I'm going to be a full-time, hands-on legislator, being available to groups, to churches, to individuals, to listen to you and your needs. I promise that I will always represent all people in the House of Delegates for the 20th District, and I ask for your vote on November 7th. Thank you very much.
We hope you have enjoyed this presentation. Remember, November 7th is Election Day, and your vote counts.
The Woodrow Wilson Candidate Forum has been brought to you by the Peason Financial Group, because we know the best choices are made when you have reliable, accurate information. At Peason Financial, we work hard to ensure our clients make well-informed, smart financial decisions. Peason Financial, with offices in Stanton and Charlottesville, wants to remind you that Tuesday, November 7th is Election Day.